Hi, a couple minutes early. I won't actually start this lecture for about 5 minutes. Um, my name is Lee Solden. I'm doing a lecture concerning an aspect of natural language acquisition, more specifically, a system of that I stumbled upon slash developed, um, worked with, trying to make it better. So anyway, this system I came up with, I teach people languages. I also learn with it. Although, between teaching other people, teaching people about my system, and still for a long time trying to develop my system further, I've only managed to spend a couple of weeks per language using my own system. It does not mean I can't speak any German. I spent many, many years speaking German, studying it, reading many books in German, for instance. Does not mean I'm fluent in it. Um, and on this particular system, I've spent really very little bit of time. Uh, Although I've gone through and learned 12 audiobooks. The first one kind of took a long time, and they kept accelerating until the last one I learned. All I had to do was listen to it, and I knew it. Um, and that was a few months ago, like 4 months ago, maybe. And I haven't not done anything more with German except teach it to somebody. Um, and I keep listening to older material, but I'm not trying to push it. I'm trying to learn 12 languages simultaneously. So hey, I'm on to something else. Like today, for instance, I've decided to go through a French listening practice audiobook and write down all the words I don't know. Use that for a learning vehicle. Although, let's see here, I got about 10 words I've looked up so far in the first half hour. So not a whole lot of new words there for me, but yet uh, I think it's worth it because I need to be able to hear this French one time without reading it and understand exactly what these people are saying in the video. So I'm not there yet. So vocabulary is not a problem for me with French. I know many thousands of words. Um, Same with German and Spanish, but even more so. But in all three cases of those three languages, I have been fluent in the past, but I'm not now for lack of practice, really. Um, okay, I got 2 more minutes before I'm actually start the lecture. Um, Again, my name is Lee Solden. Um, I came up with this system which I have named Accelerated Immersion, and it's my particular method of natural language acquisition, which I developed completely without knowing what natural language acquisition was. I'm a lifetime, mostly conventional type, although the reading I've done, all the years of reading, you can't call that strictly conventional because you're reading stuff in context. That is a form of natural language acquisition. Okay, we'll call that good enough. My name is Lee Solden. I am learning and teach what I know: Greek, Italian, Dutch, French, Spanish, German, Russian, Korean, Hindi, Mandarin, mainstream Arabic, and Brazilian Portuguese. And no, I do not charge anybody. This is a hobby for me. Um, I recently got a whole bunch of people started on languages, at least the initial steps. So I'm not right now asking for people to get a hold of me and start them on more. However, I'm hoping to continue this series of lectures at the same time every day at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Um, That's 5 p.m. Eastern time. And I want to start a lecture wherein I'm actually teaching people Spanish. Step one, step two, step three. Well, the main topic of today is going to be ear tuning exercises. Ear tuning exercises is something I came up with / stumbled upon to very quickly get a person hearing a language correctly. Why is that so important? Well, the quicker you can hear it right, the quicker you can learn it by just further listening. And there's more to it than that. You cannot just pick a language up if you don't know any of it and it's completely foreign to you, nothing like what you know, nothing like any language you know, and you start listening to it, and you're not going to learn it. It might help a little bit, but and people they hear what I'm saying, and all they hear is a lot of passive listening, and they think that this is quote unquote passive learning. It's not. It's active learning, but it's supported by the passive listening, just as any child gets both active listening, where you're talking to the child, and passive listening, where everybody else is talking and it gets into the ear of the child. And such passive listening is part of why the ear tunes into the language and part of why the child picks it up so fast once their ear is tuned in. Um, so my system, again, accelerated immersion, it has 3 parts to it, or 3 steps, I should say. And when I say 3 steps, well, it's about the order that you begin doing these things in. You never stop doing any of them. First thing I have you do is passively listen to the language. I have you play an audiobook, but not just any audiobook. This is the same audiobook that you'll be started on in steps 2 and 3. Okay. And I tell people, yeah, you can listen to whatever you want, but half of your passive listening time, listen to the audiobook that I'm about to teach you. Okay. Um, so what is passive listening? I covered that in my last lecture yesterday. Go watch that. I got into detail, but basically it means you're finding something else to do, going about your daily business, and you have this language playing in the background, maybe very softly so that it does not bother you at all. And I do like 17 hours a day sometimes of passive listening, but I'm studying 12 languages, so I've got a lot of languages to support. Some people have gotten by with learning a language with as little as a half hour of passive listening and like 10, 20 minutes of active listening, and they still learn the language. It's slower, but okay. So after you've started listening to the language, you never stop. But then after 21 hours of just listening to it, the passive listening, the next thing I have a person do is I have them start ear tuning exercises. I may have to coach somebody, especially initially, um, especially if they don't speak the same language I do. So, yeah, I give them written instructions, but that does not mean they can read the English enough. Or maybe they're really good at reading English, but yet there are language barriers. There are things that just are not the same one language to the next. So you might be really strong in the language, but still not understand that what you think you said is not what the other person heard in that language. Okay, so the second step is ear tuning, and we're going to get in. That's what I'll be getting into a whole lot today. The third step, which I hope to cover in a couple of days, but today's ear tuning. The third step in my program, remember, you always do the passive listening, and you're always going to do some ear tuning. You start out like with an hour a day of ear tuning exercises, and eventually, say after a year, you're still doing 5 minutes a day, twice a week maybe. You got to keep trying to improve toward a native ear. Okay. Now, what do you do with that really good ear for the language? Now, you haven't learned a single word yet, maybe. If you're learning German, your native language is, I don't know, let's just take Mandarin, okay? Maybe Mandarin doesn't have many German words in it or any. Um, so you don't know any German at all. You've been passively listening to it. Now you've just tuned your ear into it so you can hear very clearly what a German speaker is saying. And this is all at full speed. This is like at an audiobook or on a TV program. But I only work with audiobooks as far as teaching people stuff, pretty much. I mean, yeah, we do a little bit of Netflix stuff too. I use Netflix as part of my learning, but mostly audiobooks because it's continuous, not a lot of noise issues. Uh, in a program on TV, you might have 5 minutes where hardly anything is said. So it means you listen to 5 minutes and you're not getting any of the language into your ear. Okay. So anyway, when you get to the point where you can hear the language very well, the third step of my program is called read-throughs. This is where you start connecting a known language to the target language or associating the target language words with known words. This parallels what a child does. A child, when hears a new word, the speech center looks around for definition. It looks at what is being done around the child, what is being said, other known words that are being said. It's maybe even the smells in the room, the other sounds, the frown on the mother's face, maybe if you just did something like burp up something. Okay, so you're going to get a lot of input into your speech center that's going to tie a definition to that new word you heard. Well, adults already know a language, so we can skip all the frowns and the gestures the mother might be making. We can just simply say, hey, this sentence, which you're about to hear in Spanish, means this. And why does it mean that? Well, this word means that, this word means this phrase here means that. Yeah, never mind, doesn't make any sense that those two words put together mean that. It just does, okay? But okay, you know enough to know what that first Spanish sentence means that is in a story that you are learning. Okay. And once you know what it says, you listen to it. And the first day you do this, just because you listen to it, and just because you have a really good ear for Spanish, and just because you've just looked at what it says, you still maybe cannot understand the Spanish spoken at full speed to you. That's okay. Your speech center caught it, even though you did not. Your speech center, I call this a supercomputer for languages. It caught it. Yeah, it's working. It's part of your subconscious thought processes are 20 times faster than your conscious thought processes. So what you didn't catch, your speech center did. Now, as you go to sleep that night, the speech center works to put all this stuff into your permanent memory. You wake up in the morning knowing a little bit more Spanish. You may not know the whole sentence. You may still, but although you still have questions about it, you actually start getting some understanding of the Spanish. And day 2, day 3, day 4 goes on, and you're still, working through these Spanish sentences. And you don't spend a whole lot of time in each sentence. You learn a sentence, you move on. I mean, no, not learn it. I mean, you get told what a sentence means. You listen to it while reading. You just listen to it with your eyes closed to see if you understand it. And you don't do that a whole lot of times. You can do those steps like 2 or 3 times each if you want to. But I tell people choose to move on. Go to sentence number 3, sentence number 4, sentence number 5. You're going to get through an audiobook, well into an audiobook where you have been introduced to the words. And you've been also, remember, you're still doing this passive listening. So you're getting that feedback. Your speech center is hearing all that. your speech center keeps hearing these definitions and say English just before you hear the Spanish. And you get to a certain point, and I tell you, okay, I want you to keep working forward, but at the same time, go back to the very first sentence and then try to catch back up to where you are. Well, you keep moving forward, but you may or may not ever catch up to that point. But you do a combination of these read-throughs where you're always learning new material or attempting to learn new material by this process. You're not learning it that day, you're just getting introduced, and you expect to eventually learn it. And over time, this audiobook, you're going to go through these read-throughs several times over the months. And the more you do that, it just keeps getting clearer and clearer and clearer to you. And I'll give you an idea of the acceleration here. I've read German for many years of my life, but I got a little rusty. When I use this process that I'm talking about, it still took me, and I'm learning, mind you, I'm learning many languages at the same time, but it still took me like a month to get a good grasp of what the first audiobook was saying when I listened to it. Okay, but after a month, I could listen to it and I knew what was being said. Okay, my ear was good. It wasn't a was not an ear problem. I had a good ear for German. I could read it and understand it, but it took me like a month before I could just listen to it, and just by listening to it, knew what it said. And I was on to my second audiobook, mind you, before I even got that point, the first audiobook. So the second audiobook only took a couple of weeks. Third audiobook took a week with this process. Well, long story short, by the 12th audiobook, it took me 1 hour to learn it because all I had to do was listen to it and I knew it. I didn't have to read it even. I just listened to it and I knew how the story went. A few words I did not know, but your mind tends to fill in those little gaps, fills in gaps on grammar and whatnot. So the process accelerates. Okay, so the three steps. Surround yourself with the language. Number 2, you do ear tuning exercises along with keeping yourself surrounded with the language so that you start getting a good ear for the language. Number 3, you use that good ear for the language, which keeps getting better because you never stop your ear tuning exercises. You use that good ear to start picking up the language by hearing it and reading it just after you've looked over the definitions in the known language. There is never any expectation that someone's going to learn anything on the day that they have been told what something means. Okay, questions. If you got questions, unfortunately, I've not figured out how to find them until the video's over. So if you have questions out there, do go ahead and post them as comments, okay, onto the link where you find this video, and I will afterwards go look for your comments, and I might just go ahead and do another video and answer them, or I might answer them tomorrow. I'm not sure, but I'll answer your questions if you post them in the comments here, okay? So now for my main lecture for today, how do you do ear tuning exercises? First of all, ear tuning exercises are something that I stumbled upon. Did not know that I was doing ear tuning exercises at first. I didn't know what it was. It hadn't been invented, so why would I recognize them, right? But it started with common phrase videos, and I realized my ear had tuned into, in particular, Brazilian Portuguese. And I was able, because I had tuned into it, I could say the Brazilian Portuguese phrases perfectly without having ever practiced. And I'll stop here for a moment. Yeah, that's a function of the speech center. you don't have to practice the language. If you hear it enough, you can start speaking it clearly and correctly. Now, anyone does not believe that, start talking to people who have kids and ask what happened as far as their speech pattern. There's quite a few of them that don't start talking at all until all of a sudden they're talking perfectly, clearly, they're talking a lot, and they surprise the heck out of you. So they never said a word, and all of a sudden, bam, they're saying it really well. I had a couple of kids. One was like that. One took a while before starting to talk. But when started, it was like, whoa, he had perfect pronunciation. Even in foreign languages, someone said something to him, he could repeat it. He has really, really, really good ear for languages right off the bat. I mean, just whatever was said, he could repeat. It's kind of odd. I mean, some kids have trouble speaking clearly when they first start talking. Well, like me, I was in that boat. I had to go to speech classes when I was a young kid in elementary. Um, but then there are some of us who speak perfectly right out the box. Yeah, adults can do the same thing. If they hear something perfectly and they hear enough of it, they'll want to speak it. And furthermore, it won't be incorrect. It'll come out pretty good. Probably no accent even. Um, Now, just because you can uh, talk it without accent does not make you fluent in it. Fluent is where someone asks you something in the language, you understand what they said, and you can just blurt an answer back to them. Okay, I'm not there at German and not practiced enough. Fluency can be born of my system alone. I would say if you're only limiting yourself to 2 or 3 languages and not 12 like I am. What I do is I use this system called, which I saw someone teaching Russian. It's called the storytelling method. Okay, basically you're told a story in the language, and then the instructor or maybe your language partner asks you a question about the story, and hopefully your language partner acts as a native speaker. Because part of this is you want to tune into the person's voice. Well, if 2 of you are both non-native speakers, it still works, but it may not be as good. Okay. So anyway, I've been trying for several languages, well, Portuguese and Dutch for the most part, uh, using that method. Um, And again, that's nothing I came up with. If you look on the internet and look up "Learn Russian Storytelling Method" and search YouTube to be specific, and there you'll find a video, something like 20 minutes long, I think. And you can read about that. And what I tell people is start with my method because you can learn a language really quick and a whole lot of vocabulary. You can get your pronunciation right. You can hear what that guy's saying in Russian really well, no problems at all, and start there. Now, he'll tell you that his method, if you start with it, is intense, uh, very demanding, but he says it'll work if you stick with it. Well, that's cool. But if you want to use his method, I say use my method because there's absolutely no difficulty in my method at all for anybody for any language. There's a thing called level 1 languages, level 5 languages. No, if you learn a language from me, there just is no difficulty level. You're going to learn it just like any kid growing up in China, in a house that speaks Mandarin. They're going to pick up Mandarin, and they're not going to go to school for it. They're just going to pick it up, right? If you're born in Spain, you're going to learn Spanish without studying it. And neither child is going to have any problems with the language. Now, since my system teaches you as if you were a child born in that country, that's why I call it accelerated immersion, because it parallels immersion. Well, anyway, I'm getting away from the subject of ear tuning. Back to ear tuning. Okay, the first language I ear tuned to inadvertently was Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. And this is because I was listening to it incessantly. I wasn't even studying at the time. My language partner for Brazilian Portuguese was off traveling the world and not getting on the internet. Okay, so I was not talking to him for like 3 months, and I did not speak any Portuguese during those 3 months. But what I did do was listen to a whole lot of Portuguese. I knew enough Portuguese to use it to introduce common phrases to other languages. Specifically, I was introducing Russian, Arabic, and Korean common phrases. And so at the same time, I was doing read throughs back then with common phrase videos. In other words, I would read while listening to the common phrase. That would be both the Portuguese and, say, the Arabic one. Then I would close my eyes and just listen. Now, back then, I always did it 3 times, listening while reading, and then 3 times, close my eyes and just listen. And I'd use that pattern after one common phrase after another, and I go back to the beginning of it and do it again. Okay, so, well, what am I doing there? Well, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese is not completely phonetic, but it's a fairly phonetic language. So, okay, I'm reading this and listening what's going on. At the same time, I was also passive listening, because that part of my program I'd stumbled upon on. The first thing I stumbled upon was the fact you can lightly look at something and then just listen to it passively and pick it up. That started with Greek for me, okay? So, first time I ear tuned into a language was a common phrase level Portuguese. Well, I'm a kind of experimenter, engineering background. That does not mean I'm an engineer. It means I've had a lot of, physics classes and whatnot, that type of thing, a lot of math classes, um, chemistry, whatnot, things that get you to do experiments. Okay, so I kind of have a mind toward, okay, something happened. Let's see if I can repeat this. Okay, now my ear had already tuned in at a common phrase level to everything else except 3 languages: Russian, Arabic, and Korean. Okay, so what I did was I started listening to a whole lot of Russian, like I had been listening to a whole lot of Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. And at the same time, I upped the amount of passive listening I was doing to the Russian. So now altogether, at least 7 to 9 hours a day, I was either doing the read throughs for Russian or just listening to it passively while studying something else. And now, mind you, even though I say I never study, somebody has to set up the studying. Anyway, we'll get back to that later. Okay, so I never study at this point, but I have to set up studying. So I call that studying sometimes, but that's not what I mean. If I say I'm studying, that means that I am getting myself ready to be able to do read throughs. Okay, which we'll be covering in a couple of days, more specifically on read throughs. Okay, so sure enough, after a few days, my ear had tuned in to Russian. Now, Russian, it's somewhat phonetic. I'd been studying it for a few months. I knew how to read Russian at this point. So I was able to read the Russian and able to, anybody can close their eyes and just listen carefully, of course. And sure enough, the Russian started getting pretty clear at a common phrase level. I turned to Arabic, exact same thing. I'd been studying Arabic for a few years altogether at this point. Learned, forgot, and relearned how to write Arabic, but I could read a little bit, enough to do this ear tuning at a common phrase level. And then Korean. Well, Korean I studied for 5 years before, so okay, never could hear it at all, but I could certainly read it, okay, and that wasn't too hard to read that. So this was March 1st of 2019 when my language partner come along and said, "Hey, he had me pronounce my 40 common phrases. He said they're all perfect, slightest American accent. Well, they were pretty horrible when they'd left 3 months earlier. So I realized, so we went through that. That's got me started and all that. So that was March 1st. March 10th, 10 days later, I just succeeded in tuning my ear into Korean. The Korean went from literally from, I was just listening to it in my front room. It was like buzz, 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 buzz. And all of a sudden it was like, hi, how are you? Okay, no. Well, it depends. I either understood what it was saying or not, depending if I know that particular um, common phrase. I mean, there's like 100 on the video. I knew the first 40 at that point. And anyway, but the bottom line is it came out as nice, clear words all of a sudden, okay, at a common phrase level. 2 days later, a friend sent me a audiobook in Spanish. I had no interest in that.